Coral Gables Museum and Lehman College Art Gallery via via Zoom this afternoon. I am Uni Villalonga, Chief Curator at the Coral Gables Museum in Florida. And it is my pleasure to introduce this panel, Alienations 2020 on Artistry and Alienation. This event is one in a series of programs accompanying the exhibition Alienations 2020 on view at the Coral Gables Museum through March 15th, 2021. And it is a collaboration. It is the result of a collaboration with Lehman College Art Gallery, City University of New York. This collaboration also includes an online exhibition catalog that is available on both organizations' website, and we have shared the links to this project along with the information, on the artists that we have as guests today in the Zoom chat. The exhibition Alienations 2020 gathers a group of artists who convey different forms of alienation. It looks at a variety of issues that are affecting the psychological state of the individual and the different groups affecting the psychological, and the different groups within which we live. Emerging and more established artists, many with connections to South Florida in different ways, exhibit pieces in a broad range of media, inscribed in a long tradition of responses to troubled times. These works portray the current social, political, and economic landscape. And they couldn't be more timely at this moment, as we all know. At the same time, they share sensitive insights into the direction of our humanity and hope for the future. Joining this conversation today are 4 of the exhibiting artists whose work offers very different perspectives and views within the curatorial theme and reflect the richness of statements and the concerns that are brought to the table in Alienations 2020, even if, of course, not all of them. I will introduce them in alphabetical order. They are Eddie Arroyo, Thomas Bils, Camille Eskell, and Kandy G. López Morena. Welcome all, and thank you for accepting being part of this event. At the end of the conversation, there will be a Q&A session where we will be taking questions from the audience. We invite you to submit your questions via the Zoom chat. Finally, I'd like to introduce co-host and co-moderator, Bartolome Bland, Executive Director of Lehman College Art Gallery in New York. Bland is the co-curator of Alienations 2020 in Coral Gables and of the first edition of this exhibition that we presented in New York in 2017. And before I pass the mic to Bartolome, I'd like to invite those of you in Miami to make a reservation through our website and visit the exhibition. I would also like to thank all of the participating artists, the galleries and collectors who lent their works for the show. Thank you to the museum sponsors, to John Allen, our executive director, to our chair, Christopher Spuges, and Vice Chair, Jose Valdez-Fauli, as well as the Board of Directors for their continued support. To the wonderful teams of Lehman College Art Gallery and the Coral Gables Museum who made this exhibition possible. And of course, to my wonderful colleague, Bartolome Bland, for his expertise, his patience, and because working alongside him is always a pleasure. So welcome everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Uni, for that, that wonderful introduction. And it is a pleasure to be joining you today to talk about, I guess it's a rather grim topic in some ways, but certainly very relevant in our fraught times. As Uni mentioned, she and I worked on a show in it was planned in 2016, and we presented it in 2017 at the Lehman College Art Gallery, which is in the Bronx and serves the Bronx and greater New York City. We specialize in thematic exhibitions that bring together emerging and established artists. And Uni was really the generator of this project. And she, when we were working together on it, she, I think, was very interested in the external societal aspects of alienation, whereas I think I was coming from a little bit more from the psychological and the individual sort of alienated from themselves, maybe as a result of societal alienation. And so we sort of merged those two ideas together. And in 2017, as I said, we presented what was quite a successful exhibition. Certainly that appeared at the beginning of the current administration, the outgoing administration. And we certainly definitely felt that we put a pulse on the artists, that there was this emerging discontent with society, and tracked that with earlier artists. And we were able to recurate the show with 24 a perfect 24 wonderful artists, all different from the original show, with all work that has been made in the last 4 years, a lot of it being made just in this past year in 2020. So that was a great thing to be able to do. And of course, we're already in 2021, so these things end up being kind of a snapshot in time, but it's certainly a moment that's continuing to unfold. One of the things, and getting back to the idea of psychological alienation, and kind of the first question I wanted to broach to our group of artists is this idea of alienation coming out of the pandemic. And certainly that has been a defining characteristic of isolation. All of us today here on Zoom alone in our own homes and offices working to connect. But Thomas, I thought I'd start with you, and I was wondering, because your pictures, your large-scale paintings in the exhibition are so related to this idea of isolation, and I was wondering how that's affected your practice.
The isolation has affected my practice largely because at the beginning of the pandemic, with all the businesses shutting down and my studio temporarily shutting down, I fell very quickly into a prolonged period of like a very established, very predictable routine. And what I have noticed had, like, the way that has affected my practice is I've developed more of an interest in sort of like this observational aspect of my art, specifically an interest in the type of things that I observe on my 50th time, like walking past an area, like this painting, Good Joke Nonetheless, which was actually one of probably the only large painting I was actually able to do during my studio shutdown, is a window on the street that I used to live on that I had walked by, every single day for, at least like a good 6 months. And, after 6 months, I kind of like stopped by that window one day and I was like, I've just been walking by one of my paintings this entire time. I didn't even notice. So, my future works, I'm developing more of an interest in these things that I see 50 times before I realize that, it's like a future painting.
That's very interesting. And you sort of, so you sort of think this closeness to detail, a kind of observing of the intricacies and even the mundane is something that's heightened. That might be a positive. Would you consider that in the?
I really do have a lot of appreciation for sort of I kind of like call it glitchy banality, where it's banal enough that you don't really notice it until like the 50th time you've walked by and realize that this is like one step off of kilter and something that needs to be investigated.
And we had talked a little bit about the size of your works. The works that we have on view now in Coral Gables are quite grandly scaled, but maybe you could talk a little bit about being isolated at home and what that does to your work in terms of just the practicalities of it.
My practice really spans like a lot of different dimensions. It's mostly mood based. It shifts very large to very small. But during the initial quarantine, I was living in a small studio apartment with my girlfriend and our dog. So the only time I was able to actually make that large painting was when they were out of town for a brief period. I didn't have like a dog running all over my studio. That's essentially. But besides that, I kind of like had to go back into small painting, which is where I sort of developed my idea, or developed my, I guess, penchant for like small detail painting.
And perhaps that scale is more friendly to that. I mean, it might be a more amiable kind of thing, that clip for that detail.
I really do enjoy working small. It's generally a more pleasurable experience in my experience. But again, it's really mood based. Sometimes I really just want to kind of like whip out a 70 by 70 inch painting.
Do something, yes, monumental. Camille, I know you've had a very different experience with the quarantine. You're up in Connecticut right now, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how have you been sort of coping and dealing with the idea of isolation or not isolation, as the case may be?
Well, I teach full time drawing. I teach a whole program in drawing from beginning to AP. But what happened with the pandemic is that we were ordered to leave 2 hour notice, and we were all ordered to leave the building, and everything had to be a scramble. So everything that you teach in 10 minutes or 20 minutes to talk, you have to write hours and reams of stuff for the students to
The
be
preparation.
online. So it took up a lot of time in order to get every lesson, clearly set. And I'm a bit of a fuss budget anyway. So everything takes me 3 times as long as it takes anybody else. But what happened was also, in terms of my work, I found it was going like through concrete. It was very much, not only because at the time, well, that probably did a lot to curtail my practice. It just felt like everything was slower. It was just slow moving, and I was able to get one small piece done, but I'm still working on these 2 much more complicated pieces. Still till now, I'm working on them.
Really? Well, because you're working at a high school level with the drawing, how did you notice in terms of the sense of alienation? How have your students cope with it creatively? The creativity, have they changed the subject matter that they do, or are they or have you noticed that shift?
Well, actually, that's a good question. It depends on the level that I'm teaching. I'm doing a lot of skill-based and thinking work. So they have to develop skills and how to think. And so some of them are assignment oriented. But I didn't find a lot of them really concerned about the pandemic issue. They talk about it, but the artwork didn't necessarily reflect it yet, because we still have some stuff going on, and some months to go. So it depended on what level and what class I was teaching. What happens is that I have the same students over and over again because of the program. They have to go through this program, their prerequisites. So I have the pleasure of knowing them for 4 years. So they know me.
Opportunity to sort of see how they reflect back on what is, for many of them, kind of the defining episode of their lives, right?
It is, very much so. Very much on a social level for them.
Right. That's the time you're emerging and sort of finding your own way. So that's particularly.
And they don't see their friends.
All right.
And there's not that interaction with the teacher. So we have to kind of make leaps and bounds in order to connect with them. But I know them, so that helps.
So yeah, Camille, you were talking about the social. Uni, I know that we were talking about the psychological and the idea of intimately isolated work, and that you're going back to our idea of the 2 kind of balancing yin and yang of alienation. Do you want to sort of look at the societal questions?
Yes, absolutely. Well, as we all know, throughout the past year and alongside a deadly pandemic, not only in the US, but all over the world, we have also seen a considerable number of social injustice issues reach a climax. from economic depression to unemployment to the Black Lives Matter protests that, on inequality, racism, the discussions on police reform, you name it, ending with the recent events in the Capitol. And I know that many artists have responded. I have observed how many artists have responded in a myriad of ways throughout their work. Some have even taken action. So my question, and I would like to address it to Eddie Arroyo, is from your experience, how does the embrace of heated social justice issues spur artist engagement?
Well, it goes back to what Bartholomew was mentioning, was that it's coming from a psychological point of view. It's coming from the inward, and of course, eventually, I mean, isolation tends to make you very aware of your environment, hence the social response. I think stripped away from obligations and distractions that have been either working or entertainment, people have been forced to really not just interrogate, but confront unavoidable realities, which is just loss of income or the absence of it, and the dynamics of what to do in relation to just the way new guidelines and the new reality or of how people are policed socially as well. So that has really informed my work to an extent, and also accelerated the current system that we are all in civilization, globally, locally, everything, as a pandemic has historically done, especially when we were going through plagues in Europe. There was this need to over-police society, communities at the time, in order for safety reasons. So safety has always been used historically to really impose will on the population. So it's under the guise of safety that you can really ensure absolute power. And then, there's always the alarming presentation of fascist tendencies that tend to emerge, and especially during this moment that we're all living in right now.
Because I feel that these are not new issues. These issues have been going on for such a long time now, and the claims are not new, but yet at this time we've had a year behind the screen, and it seems as if these injustices have been highlighted somehow because of all the time that we've had also to reflect on them, to see them over and over again in the news. Don't you feel the same way? And also I wanted to ask you, in your case, there is the attitude and your the action, but there is also thematically all this is very present in your work. You've been portraying these communities, you've been portraying riots and protests. What can you tell us about your work in this sense? Has it changed in the last year?
Well, actually, it's changed ever since I was at New York during the Whitney Biennale. I shared Thomas's interest in banality, but from a different perspective. and more of it's like insidious form of banality. So in relation to the demonstrations and the protests and of course the riots, the pandemic and a plague tends to really show the banality in a different way. So given the nature of my work, which is focused on gentrification in my own neighborhood and how it affects people, the banality of gentrification during a plague really does spur on certain actions that forced me to really evaluate or reevaluate the figure, because I didn't want to include figures in the work because of their seeming unawareness of what's to come, or just it wasn't really expressed as much. It just added to banality. But now that there is more consciousness within the figures that are in the work, I felt more comfortable expressing that, which were basically reintroduced during my experience at the Whitney Biennale, when there was this political action to remove a board member, Warren Kanders, which, you know, you can find that I was part of a group of artists that were demanding his removal, and a group of like 8 of us, 9 in total, that subsequently removed him from the board with the assistance of actions by activist groups in New York, led by Decolonize This Place, and included with other groups that I became familiar with, because I didn't know them before the Biennale, and then I got more familiar with them, and it was really an experience with having conversations and really understanding where they were coming from. So it made it a lot easier to come to the decision to demand for his Kanders removal from the board.
Eddie, it reminds me of that Hannah Arendt's quote called "The Banality of Evil."
Yeah, I didn't want to. Yeah,
you didn't want to go there, but it's that basic.
Well, I didn't think it was necessary, but I'm glad that you cited. Yes, of course.
The idea of criminal acts are just the most grotesque behaviors being sort of shrugged off in a sort of go along to get along kind of way.
Well, it takes in the form within our systems of bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is it's a very boring system, but can be made more interesting if you look at it in revealing in its system of banality of evil, as you cited. So I think it's wonderful in that sense, because a lot of things happen through banality. And I think that is very important to talk about.
Kandy, I wanted you to refer to the same question, because I know your work, you know, is somehow connected to Eddie's interests. You're also looking at social injustices around you, to your community. I'm interested in the way you represent also the individual. Can you comment on your process and again, how do you think, you know, this artist's engagement with social issues works for you?
Yeah, of course. My work is the opposite of Eddie's, where I am interested in the figure and then the environment came later for some reason. Now I'm focused more on the environment and how that affects the person that I'm portraying. But my interest is figurative work and minorities. So of course, anything that has to deal with that has to deal with the injustices that we are experiencing and we have been experiencing in America since the beginning of America. And these past few days is a fantastic example of how there's so many things that are continuing to go the wrong way. There was a piece in the beginning of the slideshow that showcased one of my rugs. And that was part of AIM, which was a biennial that William Cordova put together in the beginning of December. It was up for about a month, where the rug is placed in the courthouse on the steps of the courthouse of Miami-Dade. And that's supposed to be as straightforward as you can get, where you have an African-American male who's being portrayed in the carpet, and literally the people that are going into the building, the justices are stepping on them. And that was an example of how my works are as political and as social, but in a format that you have to understand mentally. Like some people might just look at just a rug on the floor and not really understand the message, but the location and what it's made out of is also important. So there's no way for me not to create work that has to deal with social and political issues. Is part of who I am as a person. I consider myself an Afro-Caribbean. My parents are from Dominican Republic. It's something that I've dealt with in school and growing up in New Jersey in the 80s. And then coming here in South Florida and living in Hialeah, where it was predominantly lighter skin Hispanic. So dealing with that as well. So a lot of it deals with my internal struggles of identity.
So when you say that the environment is having a stronger presence in your work now, do you mean by that you're more and more interested in this kind of site-specific installations where the location, the placement of the work in certain key places complete the piece? Or
I never considered site-specific until this show. And that has like turned something in my head to start thinking about where I'm placing my images. I was thinking about it in terms of gallery and representing minorities within gallery spaces and museum spaces, but I wasn't thinking about representing myself and others within our own community. So having that show has really, increased my awareness when it comes to where I'm showcasing my stuff.
That's very interesting. Well, and it leads also a little bit to the next question that Bart will pose in a minute, that has to do with the art institution and where do you show and all the inner dynamics of this relationship, right?
Well, that's a perfect thing talking about the art institutions. Kandy, when you were talking about situations, are you happy with the placement we gave you in the show? We moved you right up by the front. By the front. That's great.
I was kind of shocked when I saw that I was at the front of the show. I'm like, oh man, I'm the opener. It's just gonna. I hope that like I'm giving a good representation.
I think we got
everyone else.
You and Camille are in the opening area. So that's interesting. I mean, so the whole question of arts institutions and what they have, where they are this year. Certainly, and compared to the sort of national and international crisis, sometimes the arts are not getting as much publicity as other sort of more immediate humanitarian crises coming out of this. But there's no doubt about it in my mind. I've been working in the arts for 27 years, that this is a foundational change that we're seeing in just the past year or two. And Eddie referenced the experience at the Whitney with Warren Kanders. And the removal of Warren Kanders, which sort of seemed to trigger a whole series of investigations into board members and the way large arts institutions, the way they run, and how culture is not only produced, the artists who are working with them, but also how it's consumed. And who are these arts institutions really being run for? I think that's an interesting question. Eddie, do you have sort of some thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have been thinking about it. I think it was interesting because the group that pulled out of the Whitney, we had a conversation of whether we would like to pursue this topic, but quickly there wasn't any interest in it because at the time we got together with Amin Hussein, who is one of the leaders of the Decolonize This Place, to have engage in a discussion of potentially talking the Whitney after Kanders. And that fell apart rather quickly. It wasn't something any of the artists that pulled out, they just wanted to move on from that moment. And I think for me, it's just an indicator of just, after going through such an intense moment, people just want to either take a break or forget altogether. And I feel that in relation to like going through some sort of intense engagement that we're all going through right now, there is going to be that impulse. I noticed that last year there was an interest of just forgetting 2020 and moving on to 2021. And what was interesting is that, well, that was not easily done to, it wasn't something that happened. So here we are, I see this as another potential for missed opportunity, but I'm very much paying attention to what can be accomplished at this moment. But there is going to be this impulse to just move on. And
I'm interested, have you been following of the 8 artists who really protested at the Whitney to have their work removed? It was 8, correct?
Correct.
Have you, in terms of career, do you think that was a benefit, the sort of the publicity, the awareness that came out of it? Do you think that there is a negative in that other institutions would be, a cautious curator is going to be like, I don't want to make any waves, I don't need any problems with my board, that there would be reluctance to include these artists in other shows? Do you get any sense of that, or in your own career coming out of that?
Well, I find that it depends on the artist. I think artists, for the most part, after pulling out the Whitney, it's hard to say because the pandemic has canceled everything.
Changed so much of what would have
so
been.
If a lot of people are not aware of how art institutions function. Plannings for exhibitions happen 2, 3, 4, 5 years in advance.
Yeah.
So for anything that was planned for 2020 after 2019, that was immediately canceled. So even if any of the artists that pulled out, me included, had plans, I didn't have any real plans after the Whitney. There wasn't any kind of interest in my work.
They would have been canceled, or they would have been.
Well, I mean, who's to say? But I was just very much interested in not engaging with any kind of collaboration with institutions at the time. I needed a break from that. That way I can focus on just reevaluating what direction my work was going to go into. For me, it was beneficial to go through something that was 2020 because it gave me the space needed to really reevaluate. I mean, I spoke earlier during the rehearsal that it was an interesting moment to take the time to really reevaluate what direction my work was going to go into. And 2020 has really brought a lot of that into focus because what happened in my experience in the Whitney really did inform my work now. A lot of what's happening collectively with us right now feels very familiar to me when I was in the Whitney. It's that kind of intense reevaluation of what I have been doing and just really addressing it personally in relation to what I'm going to do socially and career-wise as well.
Well, it's interesting with this exhibition, you mentioned that institutions, particularly larger museums, are often working 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years out on exhibition plans. And Alienation's 2020, as the name belies, came together really but I think for Uni and I, we're kind of warp speed of, we started talking about this in August, September, and had it on the walls by Thanksgiving. And so that is really an incredibly speeded up timetable. And I think that a lot of arts institutions are being asked to respond to that in a very different kind of way, and on a very different kind of timetable in order to kind of continue to try to stay relevant and keep up with the current moment. Camille, what do you think about this idea of arts institutions and representation?
There was already a divide before, in terms of the galleries, especially, from the 80s to now, it's changed quite a bit. It's become smaller and smaller and smaller, the aperture to get through to a dealer, for instance, where there was a more open market in a way for the artists to interact. it's become word of mouth, either from a gallery artist or from a collector. So it's much harder to break through that barrier. A much larger barrier has come up. And then there's no physical space. And that's an issue. There's nowhere to go to unless you make an appointment. You can't really go into the galleries. Some of them let you in. So there's another divide. It's like a moat or two moats at this time, at this point. But there's so much going on online now. Everybody's online and everybody's, that's also overwhelming. So it's almost like you're in a maelstrom. You're not even sure what direction to go. You're kind of feeling lost.
And as a working artist, there's the challenge as well. I mean, we talked about comparing the middle tier of galleries being sort of eroded away.
Yeah.
You compared it to sort of what we talk about as the erosion of the middle class. It's increasingly difficult, sort of as a mid-career artist to make a living as an artist. Isn't that, do you think that's true in terms of gallery representation and that kind of strata of gallery that's really disappearing?
Yeah, I think that strata of gallery is a problem. And as we were talking, I had pointed out, though I don't think this is any big mystery, that the gallery artists that they were representing are either jumped to another gallery and were taken on, which has happened to some of them. And they even made a step up maybe, but the rest of them are still in, now we're like all in the same herd. We're all looking for someone to pay attention to our work. And there's more of us now. It was a lot to begin with. Now there's even more of us who are fighting for some kind of acknowledgement. So in terms of that, it's, the studio visits are, how are you going to have a studio visit?
Yes.
We
actually had some very interesting digital studio visits, Uni and I, when we were working on organizing this show, sort of coming through. I think Thomas was one of them, actually. We were looking at his work, and it's not the same. I mean, it was very informative, and Thomas was very charming and gracious to us, but it is not it's not the same as seeing the work in person, and that sort of moment of quiet you can often have in sort of reflection.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. And it's interesting what Eddie was saying, how, this year impasse that has happened where everything is upside down. And I was thinking as you all spoke, how interesting would it be to look at this conversation a year from now and see how things are, where things are going, because it has been a crazy time where we have lost the compass almost.
Are you proposing Alienation's 2021, Uni? Is it now going to be an annual? Yes, that's the...
Well, we have other ideas too. Anyway, my next question focuses now a little bit more on the realm of the individual, as we started, and it is from your perspectives, how can alienation lead to depression and loss of creativity? And this is something that, for example, I know is a subject in Tom's work. So I'd like to start with you, Tom.
Well, for me, I kind of like with the recent pandemic, I fell into a unique situation where from the beginning of February till like beginning mid-March, I was in Colorado for a very stimulating and exciting artist residency that I got to partake in with some other Miami artists over in Anderson Ranch in Colorado. And we got back, I think, in the second week of March, which, if anybody remembers, that was kind of where
the beginning,
where everything kicked off. So I got back from this great, I was ready to hit the ground running. I went to my studio. I stretched like 3 really big canvases, ready to just kind of like all night them and keep the juices flowing. And then for safety reasons, Big House had to close for about 3 months, beginning like the day after I adjusted those canvases. And, so thankfully I still had my my essential workers job. And,
yeah,
but
you work in a studio complex, right? You know.
Yeah, I work in a studio complex, so it was pretty outside of my ability to visit the studio for about 3 months. So it was really the first time since I think I'd even begun my undergrad, like 8 years ago, that I had ever gone longer than a week or two in the studio. And these days, if I spend any longer than like 3 days away from my work, I start to get a little bit nutty. So yeah, so 3 months of that was hard at first, and then kind of like how with this like new interest in banality that I have with my work, it was not only had I grown interest in the things that I see 50 times a day, but towards the end I was also starting to like pay a little bit more attention to like the things that I feel 50 times a day, having to kind of just like wake up, go to work, go home, and then not really know what to do with my hands anymore. So
it's like a process of introspection, right?
It's something that I had to develop really beginning a long time ago, is that there's a certain bit of a emotional awareness that you kind of have to develop as like almost a survival technique. So spending this time in isolation, having to really just kind of like reevaluate my thoughts and reevaluate my feelings and kind of like keep my head above water actually has me, it put me in a good position to kind of like get back into my practice afterwards with a lot more fuel, not only conceptually but also with just like discipline.
Wow. Kandy, how about you? I know that you are a new mom. You became a mom in the middle of the pandemic. How did it affect you or not? When I came to the US from Cuba 10 years ago, I was pregnant, and that period of time of waiting, while waiting for my, the legalization of all my papers and everything, gave me a precious year with my daughter, where I couldn't do anything other than work, be at home and be a mom, and it was wonderful, despite everything. So I wonder how it worked for you.
My son was born in April, so the pandemic kicked in March, right? So it was only me and my husband in the hospital in comparison to when I have a 2-year-old as well. And it was easier with one kid to create artwork, but when you have 2 kids at home, because the pandemic happened, you can't put your kid in daycare, so you have the 2 kids, and your husband's also home because he got laid off because of the pandemic. It was hard to try to find any kind of time to create anything because you're exhausted by the end of the day. And thankfully, I got maternity leave, so I was able to be with my kids at home, at least for the fall semester, even though that was a little bit crazy as well. But I had a professor in grad school who also had 2 kids, and a lot of people think because you're a mom, there's no way that you can also be an artist and also have a job, because it's just too exhausting. But my professor encouraged that. I don't know if she did it on purpose or not, but I remember asking her, like, how did you do it when you had kids? And she said, you were with your kids, you worked, dropped them off at daycare, they came home, you took care of them till 7, 8 o'clock, they went to sleep, you have your time, 2, 3 hours, you create. You go to sleep, you wake up, and the process starts again. So even if I usually paint really large, but during this time it has been small collages, which is the works that are inside of the show, because it's easier to manipulate, put together, leave it alone, come back, rearrange. It's not something that I have to painstakingly work on specifically with oils. So I also like to experiment with different materials. So it's a way of creating with things that I haven't created with yet. And that's exciting.
Did you also have space constraints while being at home and in a different setting than every day, you know, when you're working, or do you usually
Definitely.
work
I
at
have
home?
a tiny room in the back that's filled with baby stuff, but I have a desk that's clean just for myself, and I can only work in there because everything else is baby stuff all over the place. It's crazy. They take over, you guys.
Are we going to start seeing baby stuff, the raw materials of collage and assemblage coming in?
Little strollers, walkers,
Wheels,
little
yes.
hangy things, Legos that you step on, and then all my collage work on the table, glue, scissors. It's a hot mess.
Well, yes, I'm sure when they get older, collage is a good thing for young people to move into. You can have them start working on details.
That's right. I want to build mini artists.
Yeah, I believe the term is studio assistants. Yes, that's,
Definitely influenced somehow. And what do you do when you're not, you know, in the house in the middle of a pandemic? What do you, I know you teach as well. What do you teach? Where?
Oh, okay. So I'm a professor at Nova Southeastern University. I know that we had a question regarding like institutions.
yeah.
We have students who intern there and also students who work at the NSU Art Museum after they, you know, got the internship. So it's nice to have a young voice within the museums because you get different kind of work. It's not just the same old art history stuff, but now it's a way of looking at current artists and how they reinforce the ideas of historical artists, right? So building that kind of connection is important. So yeah, I teach studio arts, drawing, painting, also art history, so a little bit of theory in there as well.
So I imagine going back to the, you know, talking about institutions and being more aware, well, sometimes after these discussions, how institutions have been more aware of social issues and you know, local art. How do you feel it has happened with NSU? And for example, I was commenting also in the rehearsal that I feel the local institutions in Miami are more connected to lately to gender issues, to local artists. I know that, for example, Pam purchased from local galleries a while ago.
Whereas Art Museum, for those of us not in Miami.
Yes, but I'm telling my reference from my experience and asking how did it happen with NSU? Do you feel the same way? Is there the interest for, you know, connecting with the current discussions? If possible, sometimes exhibitions, as they said, at planned 4-5 years in advance. But have you seen any change, any shift?
Yeah, definitely there's been changes, especially with that last show, the Happy Show. There was a lot of current artists that are working today, and there's also, like I mentioned, historical work. But even like within Miami itself, and even within Broward, there have been more exhibitions and different curators, right? A lot of more minority curators that are popping up, which is giving access to artists that we usually don't see down here. Because it wasn't important. But I mean, it's South Florida. Like, it's a hot pot of everybody, and everybody wants to be represented. Everybody wants to see themselves within the wall spaces. And I also think that the students help to bring a new wave of diversity within the walls of museums and galleries.
Definitely. Okay. Bart, do you want to?
Yes, well, we thought, given the topic of alienation where we are, that we might end not on a high note, but on maybe try to end a little bit on a grace note with our questions, and talk to each of you about what kind of solace do you get from art? What kind of comfort, and what do you sort of hope? Where do you hope the art world's going to go from that? Kandy, let's start with you, since we were just talking about NSU. What kind of comfort do you take from art?
I think artwork for me and creating is more about art therapy. Like I'm trying to grapple all the things that are happening within society and politically within myself through my pieces. A lot of my pieces have reflective film in it, so it's kind of like a mirror where people can see themselves within my pieces. I feel like it's important to look, read, and identify other people's perspectives beside your own. And even playing with these new materials, like that gets me excited for creating new things. And showcasing my work in different places is also something
What kind
that,
of, what kind of, when you're finished with a collage, I mean, what is your sense? Is it a kind of relief from having finished something? Is it
no, never. I'm
I-
always
no.
like, let me try something new. I didn't like the way that that looked. So what will happen if, let's say, half of it is mirrored film and the other half is clear plastic? And then when I'm done with that piece, I'm already thinking about the next one. So my sketchbooks are like full with ideas that I wanted to try. And then I make a piece and I'm like, yeah, the idea is not going to work. Let me try something else. So it's constantly like rotating different ways of getting the message out there.
So that's interesting. It's sort of that kernel of dissatisfaction keeps you moving
Always.
forward, right?
It's so annoying.
Eddie, do you find the same thing when you're creating?
Well, yes, mine is similar as well. I think, I mean, it's always been informed by the environment I'm in. I mean, we go back and forth in this ongoing conversation about nature and nurture, and I think it's essentially both. You know, one informs the other, and I think in terms of what's happening now in the institutions and any kind of optimism, I think it all has to be, it's relative. It's based on the situation that's been created by by contingent forces. So
Do you feel hopeful? Let's say, just speaking of museums, do you feel hopeful about their future, or not particularly? Or
well, I don't. Well, the thing is, it's not about feeling hopeful. I really don't feel museums would ever go away, only because of their place within society. So museums will exist in one form or another. What a museum is today was not the same thing it has been 30, 40, 100 years ago, you know. So it's evolved. How, I mean, I can only optimistically say that where a museum or institution will evolve highly depends on everyone, you know. So it's more about I have more optimistic about humanity in general.
Ed,
And it's coming from a pessimistic place, obviously, but it is. I mean, still, I'm relatively optimistic.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
No, I see it as an optimistic answer, actually.
That was good. That was good. Thomas, what about you? Do you see pinks, purples, and fuchsias pouring in rainbow colors into your work, or?
No, I have a generally gray palette, but I think my saving grace with art has been sort of more this community social aspect. I've had this project going on for some time now called Still Cheaper Than Paying, where what I would do is like if I get a parking ticket or like a rent invoice or something, I'll do a quick painting on it and then sell it for whatever the price of the fine was. By design, these are very democratically affordable, and by design of their social media, I guess, sales presence, is that they exist pretty far outside of institutions or people you might consider to be the usual suspects of like art collecting and trading. And I've almost made about 70 of these so far, and virtually none of them have gone to like career art collectors, and mostly to people who are in my inner circle or through collecting these pieces have become part of my inner circle. So it's been a real saving grace during this pandemic, is that I have, this very easy practice of mine that one of its core constituents is, engaging with the people around me, coworkers, friends, people who just have stumbled upon the project. So it's been really nice that, like every couple of days I make one of these, and, as a result, I either make a new friend or I get to connect to an old one.
But Thomas, I'm getting worried about you. If you have 70 citations, are they going to come for you and take you away?
No, it doesn't affect my insurance. It doesn't affect my driver's license. The worst case scenario is they'll send collections after me if I don't pay them for 3 years. But
and you get to park anywhere you want, right? That gives you
I actually got a new car recently, and the old car I left in a lot in South Beach to farm tickets for me.
Very.
I still got another 10 to work through, and the project's also been expanding to mechanic invoices and credit card bills and so. Just kind of developing a community of people who are willing to pay my bills in exchange for a quick painting.
There was an artist in Queens, I remember, who was taking expired parking meters and building little dioramas within the parking meters. I can't remember their name, but it would be a very interesting show. You can have them on the cars and he could have them in the meters.
I'll have to look into that.
Yes, I have to look into that. Camille, we'll give you the last word on term your thought about solace in art and what we might be optimistic about sort of moving forward.
Okay, solace in art, I guess it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about looking at art, well, looking at art, I find solace in the work that I gravitate to, and there's a couple of shows I want to see. Now I'm in quarantine.
Would you like to give a plug? Is ours one of them?
Say that again?
Is ours one of them? Are you going to give
Absolutely. And Teresita Fernandez's show I really want to see, because I saw her when we were at the Perez. Yeah. She's wonderful. So her show is up now, but I'm in quarantine, so I can't go anywhere yet for another week or so. In terms of solace in my own work, I think solace is an interesting word. I don't know that it's solace. I don't know if it's solace or drive. I suppose there's an element of solace in I
think about solace as more consuming the work rather than generating it, which I think really needs more oomph behind it.
I think that's inspiring.
The satisfaction to keep.
Yeah, there's satisfaction in seeing work that bolsters you. But there's also satisfaction in the work that you're able to produce or that you want to produce. And I don't know that ever went away for me. I think that I've always been inner driven. My work is very much about not only personal experience, but then it's a universal experience, because it's a lot about gender and being erased. I noticed Kandy's figures are not there. But why not be there in my work? Hey, I am here. So it depends on your the way you want to say the very thing that you're saying. So for me, it's I guess solace solace, drive, need, inspiration, and having needing to say what you want to say with the materials and the way you want to say it. Now, my materials change from series to series, and I combine them. It just depends on the series. So now this new series has digital work with physical sculptural work and fabric and paper and all kinds of other things. So for me, it's also, that's exciting, because Kandy was saying about different materials. So for me, there's again, it's exciting. I don't know, the solace, kind of like, how am I going to do this kind of thing? So I don't know how.
We didn't know whether boredom is, a creative instigator, along with isolation, that the process of being bored forces a kind of creativity out of you is an interesting.
I'm never bored. I always have too much to do. Yeah, my thing is like, how am I gonna wade through all this stuff, life stuff and art stuff, and we're one-man bands on top of it. So we're promoters too. So we have like, how many hats do we wear? So I really don't have time to be bored.
Right.
So that's just me though. Other people have different experiences. My studio's in here. I mean, I create where I live.
Hmm.
So I don't have to go somewhere. I never liked that, to go to yet another job. I want to be able to come in and out whenever I please. So that didn't affect me. Other things affected it, but not.
That's like geography is destiny, right? Impacting what you're going to be able to make. So, Uni, what are your thoughts as we're wrapping up our wonderful?
Yeah, thinking, yeah, listening to all of you talking, from the artist perspective. Obviously, I'm not an artist, although I'm very involved in this creative, artistic process every day and night, because my husband is an artist, all my friends are artists. I live in an artist world. And what I'm thinking is that it's so difficult sometimes to separate art from the life that we live every day. So when we go out to socialize, we go to an exhibition, which is technically work, where you meet people that you're interested in and you do what you have to do. And in the same way, you suffer so much, as Kandy was saying, if something goes wrong, if you cannot come up with the right solution. And there's a fragility, right, related to this kind of work that we all do, that is interesting psychologically, how the ups and downs of the individual are so related and not detachable from what the individual does. I feel, and that's the same way I feel. I suffer through a text sometimes, and I drive my family crazy. I come home and want to kill everybody. And they want to kill me until it's done, and then I'm the happiest person. And it's all so fragile in the way that I'm so dependable on it. How about you, Bart?
Well, I think it's interesting, the connections on a curatorial level. I think the pandemic has been really crushing in not being able to see a lot of artist studios and make those kind of visits. That's been very difficult. But I do think that being online has certainly propelled us to have different kinds of relationships with different, whether it's other curators or other institutions, even within our own institution at City University in Lehman. There's a willingness to work together. Maybe people were in other buildings or there at different times. They're much more willing to come together over Zoom sometimes,
Yeah,
are in person. And so there's a real, some relationship building that's gone on that I think probably would not have happened if we were not all on Zoom or online. So that's been a positive. But I'm working on a show right now that we're finishing up that will only exist in the ether, unlike Alienation's 2020. And I have to say, there's something kind of crushing about that, even though I think it will be a very beautiful catalog and we're actually going to print a physical catalog. It's not the same thing, to know that it did not come together in a three-dimensional way is a disappointment. So.
And as somebody was saying, also the fact that you are now competing not only with your local institutions, you're really out there, and at 9 o'clock, MoMA is doing something and somebody in Australia is doing something, and that, the public has to decide, and there is this bombardment of information and things going on, that it's a struggle for an institution
it's a redefining of community, I think, because it's sort of, we're very much based in the Bronx and people want to see that work. But if you are competing directly against other major institutions, or you just have a particular interest as an individual in something that's going on in Phoenix, you may come to identify that as your artistic community, for better or worse. So there's that kind of breaking down of the geographical barrier. It's interesting.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've got all of the artists, I don't know if we said this, we've got all of the artists' websites In the chat, for anyone listening, if you're interested, please go on and look at our 4 wonderful artists, and also go to our websites to read about these artists and the works that are in the show, because we're quite proud of our catalog. We thought we did a nice job.
It's beautiful.
You can see it.
Thanks. Should we open to questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, let's see. I'm gonna check the chat. Bart, if you can also help me make sure that
yes, I don't think that we've got some congratulations for such a spirited discussion.
Nice.
So that's very nice. If anyone does have a question, and certainly, you know, if you do have questions, if you're watching and listening now, you can certainly get in touch with our institutions, and we're, you know, always happy to put people in touch with the artists who are in the show. That's
absolutely, and there is much more information, as Bart said, in the websites, the catalog. We will be realizing a few other events. We're thinking on conversations with other artists to, you know, to show the
round out the voices in the show. Yes,
exactly, of voices in the show. So we hope that you tune in and follow what we're doing, both from, you know, Lehman, the Lehman website and the Coral Gables Museum website. And we are in Facebook, we are in Instagram. And as Bart said, we can always answer questions that way or put you in touch with any artist that you're interested in.
Should we say don't be alienated? Is that what we should go out on?
Definitely don't.
I just want to say one thing, if you don't mind. Zoom does have its positive aspects. I mean, it can be, you know, alienating, but if this was a physical thing at the museum, I would never meet these other artists. I would never see them. So there are a lot of positives to this crazy, you know, time we're living in, and this particular technology is really very useful. So that was my big.
And we've recorded this conversation, which we will have up on our social media, so that people will be able to see this, you know, across some of the other fields. So that's
which is something that sometimes we don't do physically. You know, if you don't attend to the conversation, you miss it.
That's right.
Which is something to learn for the future, even when we go back to the physical world.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a wonderful discussion, and I feel like I've learned a lot. And
thank you. Thank you all. It's been wonderful, and I hope you know, all the persons that are watching follow us and continue to see what we're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting this together.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.